to discuss important issues relative to our city. We're grateful for the time, effort, and dedication and energy of our local leaders and for the seriousness and weight in which they're giving the considered discussion. We ask that that will guide us and help us to make wise decisions and to be fruitful and be good stewards with the citizens' money. We're grateful for the opportunities we have to work in public service and to meet people and to make friends, and we pray that that will help us to continue in these efforts as we go through this meeting. We say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bryce. Before we begin with going further, I'm supposed to remind you that those in attendance, that I would like to remind those in attendance that although this is a public meeting, only presenters and those seated at the council table may speak or answer questions unless otherwise directed. So you know, the situation for this meeting is we want to get as much information as we can in the next 2 hours. Then we'll have an opportunity to think about it overnight. Then we're going to come back again tomorrow and have further discussion and answer any questions that you might have come up with. And then we will be taking it to the city council meeting tomorrow night for a potential vote. And if it goes to the bond, if we're going to put this on the bond election, it has to be done by the 22nd. We have opportunities to have another meeting on the 14th and probably the 21st, should we choose to, and to wait. I think that it's important that we make this decision as soon as, personally, I think we need to make this as soon as possible and decide which direction we go with what we're doing. So we'll begin with the review of the options. And Mr. Parker, John?
I just want to make one clarification. It's August 21st that it has to be approved by, not the 22nd.
It has to be approved by the 21st. Thank you. So we might have to.
So that's a Wednesday. So
I thought our
meeting is the 21st.
21st is Tuesday, I thought.
Correct. Yes. Right. Yeah, we just have to have it in. My understanding is we have to have it into the Lieutenant Governor on the 22nd. By the end of the day. So again, so the 21st would be your last day to act.
Possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure that was clear.
I appreciate that.
And Mr. Chair, part of that too is by having that. It naturally works for us because our meeting's on Tuesday, but really, if whatever resolution is adopted has to be approved by you as the chair and the mayor ultimately before we can send it in.
Correct.
Okay, so we're thank you.
Can I just make one other comment? We have Eric Hunter here, who's with Chapman and Cutler. He's our bond counsel, and he's kind of the expert and can help us legally. One good question that might be for him would be, by doing it a day before, does that create any concerns from a legal perspective? If we were to just mess up one little thing or do something, or is he fine with us doing it the day before? It might be a good question to ask, just to make sure that we get his opinion on that.
Don't forget that question. You go ahead, answer that now.
We can turn it around in a day. I mean, ideally we'd have more time, but we can turn it around now.
I agree, and ideally we'll make this decision as quickly as we can. And we just want to make sure that the council feels comfortable with the decision they make. Dave?
We talked about this decision, and I guess for me, it's. I guess I'm not clear exactly. I almost see there's two decisions. There's a decision that I'm committed to making by tomorrow, which is which of the three options should we look towards, and then to me there's a second question of what should be the bond amount, what should be the verbiage on the ballot measure, and I see that we could do those both tomorrow, but I don't necessarily see that they have to be done tomorrow. And so I just want, when we talk about this decision, are we talking about the first, are we talking the second?
I appreciate that, and I think what we'll do, we'll come back. Let's have our presentations, but because we've got time for those discussions later on, and that's a great point to be bringing up. Mr. Parker, will you start us off?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Parker, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So we've structured this in a way that we try and have 3 or 4 quick presentations to give you the summary, and then all the discussion afterwards. And so we'll have people in the room that can answer some of your questions as we go. But if you'd hold your questions till the end of the presentations, then do them all at once.
Thank you.
Okay, but I don't want you to forget your questions. This is too important to not
for sure.
interrupt, I think. So
For sure.
make sure you write them down or something, but I do.
Alternatively, you can spread them out, but our fear with having too many, or having the 4 separate things is a lot of the questions blend as you get talking.
And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So let me just say at the outset what a good experience it has been for us to go through these open houses and public comment periods. I will admit to getting a little weary with some of the social media stuff. I feel like that's all I've done the last a couple of weeks, but it's been invigorating to have the discussion, and those who came to our open houses were thoughtful, anxious to learn. I think it's been just a really, really good process. And so as we share with you today some of the new information that's been developed to help you reach a conclusion on which option to put on the ballot, let me just say at the outset that it's been extraordinarily helpful for us to not only articulate the story as we've been interacting with our residents over the last couple of weeks, but also to hear their feedback, and some of what you'll hear today is largely a result of some of the feedback we received in those meetings. So just a refresher on the 3 options that have been proposed, and we'll ask John Morgan in a few minutes to go through some updated numbers, but let me just highlight. So the 3 options that have been before the council up to this point have been option 1, which is to acquire and pay for the remodeling of the Sears building at the Provo Town Center Mall for the purpose of relocating the city offices, public safety facilities, meaning police headquarters, fire headquarters, and the dispatch center. And then vacating the space here in the city center blocks in the downtown, which could then be potentially used for sale, redevelopment, some public-private partnership opportunity. The second option was to build a new police, fire, and emergency services, emergency dispatch center, which would include incorporating fire station number 1 into the new design. And then to essentially do a basic remodel and structural strengthening of the existing City Hall complex. So that constituted option number 2. Option number 3 would be to essentially build a new public safety center, police, fire, emergency dispatch, and incorporating Station 1 into that design, building a new City Hall, city offices complex, and then demolishing everything else on the block with the exception of the Covey Center, and then utilize most of that reclaimed space for surface parking. That's kind of how option 3 lines up. So we've done a number of things in addition to the city open houses and soliciting public input and trying to engage the public, many of whom have been very passionate about their favorite choice. And some of whom have been, have reserved judgment, kind of waiting to hear what else happens. So a couple of the things we heard, both from several council members, others in the administration, and the public, was that if we're thinking about doing a new construction project, whether that's the public safety building or the option 3, new City Hall and public safety building, that we might ought to think a little more long-term. In other words, potentially build some space that would not be immediately needed, but would give us a longer time horizon associated with options 2 and 3. So build, essentially shell some space into a new building, which could meet future growth projections for a period of time. And so the numbers that we'll be sharing with you today include in both options 2 and 3 some additional square footage beyond what would be available to us in the mall site. Now, that being said, one of the great things, again, about all 3 options are acceptable options, and it could certainly work. One of the advantages of the mall site, while it's the disadvantage is that it's a defined space, it's 4 walls and 2 buildings, essentially. It does provide a lot of acreage on which additional facilities could be eventually constructed. we would be much less constrained on that space than we might be in our existing property for a future expansion. And so in an effort to try to be rational about the comparison of the three options, we did not try to include additional square footage at the mall, simply because we recognized at some point if we needed to expand, we might have to build additional square footage. But recognizing how difficult that might be, particularly to accommodate parking if we needed to expand, we thought it would be wise to consider building some additional square footage in the new buildings, in both option 2 and 3. So, given that we spent a lot of time with our architect, and Peter Moyes is here from Architectural Nexus to respond to specific questions, as we have been kind of putting pencil to paper here over the last couple of weeks to ensure that we're asking all the right questions and giving you the right answers. And so we'll ask John Borgett to run through those numbers with you. We are happy to answer questions. We've been spending a lot of time trying to answer questions in the last couple of weeks, and hopefully have articulated a number of those to the public in general. Be happy to spend as much time as you would like to today on that. And then Cliff has undertaken the responsibility to encapsulate for you the last couple of years of efforts on this, last couple of weeks of efforts in terms of the public outreach effort. So, any questions for me before we turn the time over to John? Okay, John, thanks.
Thank you, Wayne.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Van Buren.
So a couple things that I would add, and Wayne's done a great job kind of laying the foundation, but one of the other things that both Dick Blackman and I have done that we felt like was very important as this is becoming closer and closer to making a decision is that we wanted to make sure, because I've heard this told to me a number of times, is that, you know, we want to make sure that we do this right, you know, regardless which option we take. And so we have met with each of the directors, okay, and went specifically through the detail that Peter's worked on to make sure that, and we did a study. How many years ago was the space needs study done, Dick?
It was 5.
5 years ago?
Yeah.
And so things change over 5 years, okay? And so we wanted to make sure that it was up to date, and so we met with all the directors. And what we've kind of focused on and what we've done is made sure that the space that we currently would have in this new structure, if we were building a mill structure, would meet our needs today, and that we could have additional space, as Wayne mentioned, that we could utilize going down the road. And we've currently planned for about exactly 12,000 square feet of unfinished shell space that could be moved into. And so that's kind of a little bit of a background, but if we could, the other thing I would mention is that when we did the first option study, we wanted to make sure that all the options were comparable, and so we had the square footage on each option the same, which was basically what the mall space is. Where now what we've done is we've left the mall space where it's at, but for building a new public safety building and for option 3, which would be new public safety and the city center, is based on the information that we've done through Peter in showing what our needs are and all the information we've got from meeting each of the directors, as well as the shelled space that would be available for growth and expansion. And so we could pull up, the first one we want to pull up is the, let's see here, the PDFs. Right here, this Provo City Center cost matrix, okay? And so what this right here does, I'm just going to kind of go through, this is based on Peter's analysis and the analysis that we've done for option 3, and it's a component of option 2, okay? And I know early on when we had sent out some information, we had shown that option 3 was roughly 60 million.
John, could we get an analog copy of that?
Yeah, well, I can get a pass around right now.
You pass around, yes. That number based on having the additional 12,000 square feet of shelled space that gives us the capacity to move in, as well as any other needs as we went through and met with each of the directors, are all built into these numbers. There's some other things that are important. first of all, we show a 10% contingency, which is, let me see if I can get this to work right here. Can we work that?
See it? It's off.
You can turn it on for me. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, you can point, but you can't.
Okay. I got it going. There we go. Okay, so we're off the bat, you can see we've got a 10% contingency would equal about $5 million. The other thing that we've been concerned about is Peter went in and updated this architectural study to include the current construction costs today, okay? What they are right now. And then because we've assumed that construction would start in the fall of 2019, and so we went ahead and increased the numbers for construction inflation about another almost $3 million. Because as we all know, the costs continue to go up. We wanted to make sure that was adequate. We've also looked at, we've got our bonding number of 1%. We've got moving costs listed here. Anyway, the bottom line is that when you take those items and look at, and you can also look at the square footage. The gross square footage is about 165,864. Okay, and in the current, and this gives us a longer horizon that we could deal with growth. And we feel like at the mall that we could that would work for our current needs, but it's 135 versus 165,000. Okay, so that's quite a bit larger. But if we were going to build a new facility, we just felt like we wanted to make sure that it was adequate, because we would hate to build a facility and then have question ourselves saying, why didn't we provide for growth? Why didn't we account for those specific things? And so that's just kind of an overview of kind of where we're at on the high level numbers. Does anybody have any specific questions about these?
I've been
Yes.
writing down several questions, but I've been holding all of them. But this one's a really specific one. It was said that we would build 12,000 square feet of unfinished space that
That's
we could
correct.
grow into. Is that included in the 165, or is that excluded in the 165?
It's included.
That's okay. Included
Yes.
in the 165. Okay.
Yeah, so you back that off and you would be at 153 without that space.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, George.
Are there costs, where are the costs for maintenance and over the life of the building? Or is that factored in here at all? That's not, right? This is just to get it on the...
Yeah, and it's not, and what we've kind of assumed, and it's a pretty fair assumption, we're going to have more square footage, okay, but we're going to have the cost per square foot to maintain it is going to be lower because it's going to be a newer facility. But we've just assumed that those, between having the additional square footage versus the efficiency, that our maintenance for the new building would be pretty comparable to what we've had in the past.
But you're talking about, I'm thinking about the three options comparative across the three, right? So what is the length of the longevity of the building multiplied by the annual cost of maintenance of the building?
Okay.
That's part of the cost of the building. But
Yeah.
I haven't gotten a clear sense of how to compare those three in that sense.
Okay, we can work on it. I don't have anything prepared for that right now, but we could sit down and talk about it.
Because it seems to me like if we're looking at 20 years versus 30 years versus 30 plus years, and we're looking at a refurbished building, remodeled building, brand new building, we could be talking about a pretty significant difference in price over the long term, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the other reasons, particularly with the mall option that we've looked at as a 20-year option rather than a longer term, has to do a lot with size and growth within the city. But there would be some differences in maintenance costs. And once again, is here where the square footage is less at the mall, and we have more square footage on the large, but we can do some analysis and show that to you.
I would really appreciate that.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's go to the option document, which is, you can close that.
Anything you want?
Okay, go to the direct, okay, one that's just called bond options, that's it. Okay, so this is just kind of a high level view, and I'm gonna kind of walk through, and we've actually got both options 1, 2, and 3 that we've been talking about, the Sears purchase. And this is, you can see the square footage where we've got 134,718 versus 154,515. That's if we were to go with option 2, or the 165,864. I will mention one thing, that under option 2, with the public safety building right here, that's where that 90,000 is. We assumed that half of the shelled space, okay, roughly 6,000 square feet, would be included in this number for option 2, so that you would have some growth capacity if all you decided to do was the public safety building, okay? And then these costs, the cost right here of basically the 28,985,000, that's the number that we got from Brixton Capital for the mall, okay? And then this 40,938, that number, that 40 million, that comes right off of the sheet that we just handed out to you. That's the updated number from Architectural Nexus that includes, we've sat down with the chief, we went through all those numbers, both chiefs, and that's where that number comes from. And of course the 68,694,920 is the option 3 number that we just went through on the sheet. The remodel upgrade, this is the cost of the land basically at the mall, and then this is the cost to do the land and the building, and then this is the cost to do the improvements. And then this 9.6 million is the $150 a square foot to go in and do the seismic upgrades and work on the overall remodeling of the existing city center in option 2. The FF&E of $2,487,967, that's the same number that was used in option 3, because the feeling is if we're moving to a new building or a different building, you would want to upgrade your furniture, fixtures, and equipment. This contingency of 2.5 million, the reason there's no contingency listed over here is it's already included in the model that I shared with you. But for option 1, we've listed 10%. Oops, I just hit that button. Here we go. So we've listed the 10%, and the 10% is of the remodel and upgrade cost. The 5.5 million is given to us, and it's pretty much a known. And so that's where, and it's also provides some contingency for the FF&E as well. That's why it's a little bit larger than just 10% of the remodel and upgrade. The moving costs, we just estimated at $1 million to move to the Sears building, and there are some moving costs also for options 2 and 3. They're just included in that model. They're much less because it'd be a much closer location. And then IT relocation, that's a pretty significant number, because if we move to the Sears building, we have to run fiber under the railroad tracks. It has to come from the city center. There's a lot of fiber work, and we had Josh Earrig, our IAT director, look at it. It's still a rough estimate, but we feel like it's a conservative number, but it's something that needs to be planned for. If we went with option 1, this just assumes that we would leave fire station number 1 where it's at, but we would have to do some significant work. It currently is dependent on this structure for its utilities and for its fiber, and so that we would have to go ahead and do some major work to make it independent. And then fire station number 2, we have our $4.5 million. Once again, that's included in option 2 and 3, but it's on the model that we got from Architectural Nexus. That's why it's not listed on here. And then the bonding is also listed over in the document that I provided, but it wasn't listed in option 1. And so our estimated costs now are about $44,530, which is pretty close to the same that we'd shared before for option 1. But with a lot of work and analysis with Peter and meeting with the directors and coming up with our shelved space, option 2 is now just about $50,500,000, and then option 3 is the $68,694,000, and which came right off of our analysis. And how do I scroll this down a little bit?
Here, I can do it.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. And then we're showing what our annual payment would be, which is based on the information down below. It's assuming a term of 20 years, interest rate of 3.5%, which Zions has provided to us, which is a good, reasonable estimate, conservative estimate, and then our issuance cost of 1%, and then the median cost of a home in Provo is $265,000. The monthly cost per household would be $6.43 for option 1, $7.31 for option 2, and then $9.95 for option 3. And then we've also got the impact, the monthly impact for businesses of roughly $22 for 1, $25 for 2, and then $34 for option 3. These assumptions down at the bottom are just important to note. There's no reduction in cost for the sale of land. Likely, if we were to pursue option 1, we could sell more land, but there's concern about timing and when that money would come in. The Justice Court stays at its current location based on our size, and I've got another sheet I want to share with you in a minute that kind of talks a little bit about the Justice Court and why we're proposing it to stay at the current location, and what the cost would be. Also, that the COP building, which is over on 300 West, we assume that that lease would end, and we've used the lease savings in there to offset that. The replacement of the fire station number 2 includes the cost for the community training room. That was an option that we have recommended and included in the cost there. Option 2 and 3 have not factored in a cost for a temporary location. One of the things that I would mention, that I didn't mention earlier, is that right now in our assumptions, we're assuming that both public safety and the city center would start construction in fall of 2019, which would mean that they would either, they may be both at the same ends of the block, possibly on the west end of this block, but that's the place that would work the best, because we could continue to be at our current location until the building was done, and then we could move over. But if you had to raise part of this building and had to stagger or phase in the construction of, for example, public safety, if that took delayed that project for another year and a half, you would need to account for construction inflation and assume that it may take another year or 2 for that to start. And if that were the case, we would need more money. And so right now we're assuming that we would start construction in the fall of 19. We do feel like if we were to pursue that avenue, that the money that we've got set aside would be adequate if we were to construct on the west side of this, on the west end of this block. As I mentioned earlier, the cost to remodel the city center is $150 a square foot under option 2. And then, as I mentioned earlier, options 2 and 3 assume the estimates that we've got from our architect and from Peter. In the mall space, there was some discussion about putting an atrium in the middle, which would provide for additional lighting and in the building, but it would cost additional money, plus it would reduce the amount of space that would be available, and so that $135,000 number would go down. And for those reasons, we have assumed no atrium. We were also approached by Brixton of potentially leasing some space outside the mall area, which would provide more square footage, but that's something that you can't really bond for, and we looked at it and felt like, at least initially, that wouldn't be our proposal, and so we had assumed no outside mall area. Okay.
John, will you explain it to me? You can't bond for lease space. That's the state law?
O&M.
Yeah,
That's O&M.
it's an O&M, and there's no real property involved. And I don't know if you would add anything else to that, Eric, but leasing space from a private entity is not something that qualifies for expenses you could bond for.
City needs to own
Yep, yep. Okay, well, let me show you the justice court numbers. I think it's important. So you can go ahead and close this document. Okay, right there. So we had Rhiannon and our justice court team go in and take a look at what their needs would be, and that number actually came down by almost $1 million based on what their needs are. And so $5.8 million is what it would cost if we wanted to add the justice court in, and then we would need to add contingency to that, which is 10%, which would give us about $6.5 million. And then our issuance cost, which would give us a total of just a little over $6.5 million. That would basically require an additional increase in the payment of $457,890. We looked at our current lease payments. Matter of fact, over the next 20 years, we currently have a 2% escalator in our agreement with them, and so assuming that would be your average lease payment. And so the annual property tax that would be needed would be approximately $291,000 if you were going to include the justice court. I would mention that we currently have a lease there that has a couple of options to extend, and we feel like if we make the decision to move forward, or whatever decision we make, if we felt like the court was going to stay there for a longer term, we would like to renegotiate that lease and extend it for a longer period of time. We've talked to, and it actually falls under my area of responsibility, but both Rhiannon and Judge Romney feel like the current space is meeting their needs. They're happy with the space. Would they like to be part of the city center? Sure, they would love to. But I will say that it's meeting our needs. It's excellent parking. People can find it. There just doesn't seem to be any problems other than the fact that we don't have the synergy of having it with us and part of the city center. And so anyway, down here a little bit lower, you can see that, basically the impact would be $7.24 per year for a resident, or roughly 60 cents a month to add the court based on the net offset with the current lease payments. And then the annual cost of a business would be about $25 or $2 a month. And that's based on those same assumptions of a 20-year term, 3.5% interest rate, 1% bond issuance cost, a median home of $265,000, and that's actually a business of $500,000. So, any questions for me, Dave?
This is related to George's comment, but I would be really interested to see a best estimate 50-year net present value analysis.
Okay.
Because with options 1 and 2, you're going to incur remodeling or expansion costs sooner than with option 3, and then factoring in the operating costs that you mentioned. I know it's kind of a crystal ball kind of a thing, but if we gave our best numbers for those things, at least it would give us a better handle on the true difference in cost, because it looks like option 1 and 2 are less expensive if you're just looking at the upfront bond number, but I suspect that they're actually a lot closer.
We can do that. It'd be hard to have that ready tomorrow. We could work on it. I don't know what the council. I would hate to hold the council up, and if you needed some kind of an estimate for tomorrow, we could work on that. But yeah, we can do that. Okay. Any other questions? George.
I have 2 questions. First of all, in the relocation of the staff during the time of construction, there's nothing in the budget for that right now, right?
Yeah, it pretty much assumes that we would, if we went with option 3, that we would build on the west side or a section of the block that doesn't currently have buildings on. And then we would just move in when it's finished, and then we'd raise the building.
So you feel you could build it without using current land at all, where a current building is?
I don't know how you
think so, but yeah.
That's why we're stating the assumption, though, because it is a fairly big assumption. I mean, One of the challenges is that ideally we would like to take that whole west end of the block, which includes the tire store, and we would need to relocate them, and so it can create some challenges, and so we would want to talk about that.
Is the cost of buying that land included then in the 68?
Yes.
Yes.
It is.
Secondly, I'm a little confused on the fire station. You showed a figure of 4514 if we move to the mall for the fire station. Then in the public safety needs, right here in the second column, it comes up to 3680. What's the difference?
Let's see, look here. So this is on the summary.
266 and the 2414 comes up to 36. And then you showed.
That's fire station 21 versus fire
That's
station
the downtown fire station.
Yeah.
which is lower in this case.
Fire Station 2 is down in the yellow under B.
Fire Station 2 is then included in all three proposals at the same cost.
It is. That's correct. Yep.
Just kind of in response to his first question, I think there's the question of could we build the two other buildings without touching this building first? And so there's the question of whether that's possible, and then there's the other question of should we? I would hate to build something. We're kind of the thought of option 3 might be kind of do it right for the long term, and if we put it in a suboptimal location or a suboptimal configuration, so that it's easier for the construction for the first couple of years, if we're going out 50 years. I mean, I think it's great if we can come up with a good, solid solution. And not have to transfer people around or minimize that, I think that's wonderful. But I also, I'd hate to commit to something or try really hard to do that and possibly compromise the efficiency of the government.
I think that's good. It's a good point.
John,
Yes, George.
could you explain again? I didn't quite understand the reasoning of you have 165,000 square feet in option 3. You have 135 in option 1. And you were including that extra square footage for the contingency of growth, right? So, but then the assumption I would assume, I assume assumptions all the time. Sorry, I'm speaking as a literature professor, gone awry. But I'm guessing that that just doesn't help me see the comparison in the sense that you're assuming we're going to need 30,000 more square feet, but in the other model we're not. So help me understand that. So why? Because it would be more helpful, I think, to imagine that if we're going to need 30,000 more feet in both scenarios, what's the comparable price again? So I'm a little concerned that that's misleading again in terms of the price difference.
So let me kind of explain it the best that I can, okay? So first of all, we know that the 12,000 is not really 12 because it's 12 that's the department square footage, but the actual number is, Peter?
Do you want the grossed out number?
The grossed out number.
Okay, that doesn't sound very good, does it?
What happens in a building, you have some space that's usable and some that's not.
Right.
And so when you take it, you factor it up, okay?
Like common space,
So it's like
the grossed out number is 17.4.
So it's 17.4, okay?
For which?
For the 12,000 of basically shell space that we've included, okay?
Okay.
So if you take the 17 off of the 165, okay? So that brings you down to 155, roughly 148, okay? So then the question is, well, what's the difference between the 148 and the 135, okay? Well, part of the 135 is sitting down with the police chief, okay? Chief Ferguson, and saying, okay, what space do you need right now, okay? And he's got some deficiencies. And what we had, and when we looked at the mall option, okay, we looked at it and it was significantly more than we currently have, okay? Right now we're at 64,000 going to 135, okay? Which you think, well, there's gonna be lots of space. We think that it would work, okay? But in option 3, we've sat down with the chief and says, I really need this right now, and we've added that, and so there's some of that. And so there's no question that if we all go into the mall space, it's gonna work, but it's not going to be as ideal as if we build new and based on the needs. So that's the best answer I can get. Would you add anything different to that, Wayne?
I guess the question I'm asking though is, would there then therefore be an anticipated increase in cost if we're comparing apples to apples? If we're needing that extra space in the mall, that's going to cost money at some point, whereas we would have already paid for it in option 3. Am I saying that correctly?
You are, and that's what's kept me up at nights. I worry about making sure that when we do this, that we have adequate space for the city and for residents, and that we're transparent and that we do it right. And so yeah, Wayne's point is that we do have the capability, we would have additional space and we could build, but we would need to have a funding source. Maybe we could do it with the general fund appropriation and do it piece at a time, but it would be needed much sooner than this other option that we're looking at with option 3.
John, can we do an adjustment a little bit? If we're talking 135 and 165, and that's 30,000 square feet, and building costs are, if they're 300, but maybe back it off to 200, well, that's $6 million that we could adjust, couldn't we?
When you say adjust, what do you mean, okay?
If we're getting 165 with option 3, 165,000 feet. Now, it's all not finished.
Uh-huh.
Some of it's unfinished, so that'll have to be factored in.
You're saying adjust option 1 for that?
Yeah, either take it off 3 or add it to 1. So
well, we originally had it off 3. When we were trying to show all 3 with the same square footage, but then the thought is that if we really are going to build either option 2, a new public safety building, or we're really going to build a new city center and a public safety building, then we would want to do it right, okay?
So then in our presentation, we just have to make sure, say, option 1 is this amount of money, but it's only for 135,000 feet.
Right.
Yep.
And I think
if we go to option 3, it's this much money, but it's 30,000 more feet.
Yes.
Unfinished.
Well, not all of it.
Not all of it.
17,000 of them finished.
17,000, so only about half of it.
And again, I think the longevity of I mean, at what point are we going to need the extra square footage?
I think, Councilman, you've hit on exactly the issue, and that is the longevity of the decision. And I think we've been really clear that the mall answer is a 20-year solution. And we think we can fit there and make it work for some period of time, probably up to 20 years. When you cross that point, then you have to make a second decision if you go with option number 1. It's the least expensive of the options, but it carries a risk with it. And I think our bigger concern was, as we started hearing from council members and residents who said, if we're going to build new, let's build what we need for a longer than 20-year solution. That's the answer. And so the square footages are no longer equal, but they're no longer equal for a reason. Does that make sense?
But that just has to be.
We just have to articulate that that's what it is.
Right. So
that's
we don't say, oh, this
it's the difference between the 20-year solution and the 30-plus year solution.
There's other stuff that goes.
How many square feet do we have now?
We have 64,000.
Do we really think that we're going to need double that in 20 years?
We think we will. Well, we think we need significantly more than that today. And so if you make the assumption that we're operating in, again, 45-year-old space it's way undersized for our current needs.
Right.
By the time you add on at the mall and you add a 20-year factor, I think you do more than double your square footage.
So my biggest concerns coming into this was, in the future, whether it be 20 years, but at some point, when you need that extra space, where are you going to get it? And if you don't plan now on this block to stay here by building a building that has that space available, then you're faced with, how do you retrofit or add on top of an existing building in 20 years, or do you somehow buy adjacent property that's valued at the moon? So how do you expand in the future? And that question is very simple at the mall, because you own the property and you have that space that you can just
you have excess land there.
Yes, you have, and you have the land. So I know it's kind of apples and oranges, but at least we've addressed the fact that the mall had room to expand, we would own the property, and it would be fairly easy to expand versus there was no option to expand. But now we have an option because we're planning ahead, putting in that 17,000.
I think almost the greater fear, though, comes back to the parking question, and that is the more square footage you put in this block in building, the less parking you have available, and the more expensive each new parking unit becomes. And so, and our thinking was that if you only built 135,000 square feet on this block, in 20 years you'd be faced with not only building new building but also structuring parking. And so again, the thinking was that it would be much less expensive in the long run to build that additional square footage by going up one more level in this building, or half of an additional level, as opposed to trying to do it later.
So, if I could just, I have seen the acreage of this block as being 8, 8.5, and 9. What do we feel is?
Well, it depends. I think the question comes back to what do you think you could eventually, what would you might not need? So the property sits on right about 9 acres.
Okay.
That also includes the Covey Center and Fire Station 1. And so depending on which option you choose, kind of constitutes what extra land you might have available.
Okay.
And I think that's where we've gotten confused, Peter.
I'll also say that this is a double block, so we have the street that
That's
runs
correct.
between the two.
Yeah, you got
And so-
4 acres per block plus the square footage of the street underlying.
Right, that's where
That's where the extra comes in.
And the mall is at 10?
10 acres.
10 acres, including parking.
Correct.
Okay. And right now, that building is 2 stories, plus lots of parking.
Correct.
So I guess I tried to wrap my head around that a little bit. And yes, there's the Covey Center is a difference, and Covey Center covers some of the acreage or whatever. But we often say, oh, well, it's so much easier to expand out at the mall. And I'm thinking, it seems to me it'd be a lot. I don't want to get. It seems to me that we could build tall here.
Yes.
And then, in some ways, it seems like, you know, if we're only talking an acre difference plus the Covey Center, we could easily go tall and have opportunities to expand in the future. My thoughts on this, and these are all the details I think would need to be worked out if we select 3. But it seems to me that we've talked about, well, we could sell some of the land or whatever. To me, we should keep the land, either lease the space or maybe even build and lease out the interior space or whatever, so that in 50 years or in 35 years or whatever, when we've used the extra 12,000 or whatever, then we do have space to expand, you know, when those leases run out. And anyway, so.
Well, that's still on the table.
Okay, great, thank you.
So the Covey Center it's sitting on a certain size piece of property. However, it needs a certain amount of parking to be functional.
Now, generally, with the relatively few exceptions during the year, our parking is off-peak with the Covey. So they're busiest on weekends and evenings. We're busiest weekdays and daytimes. And so it's been a fairly nice marriage over the last 10 years that the Covey Center's been there. Obviously, there are moments, for example, at Christmas time, when you have daytime dance recitals or Nutcracker matinee performances during the afternoon, and you have a big event at the convention center, and City Hall continues to function, where we don't have anywhere near enough parking. I think that's a current challenge we confront. I don't think it changes very much depending on the option you pick for downtown. And even if you move to the mall and transact a property deal here, you still have to accommodate for Covey Center parking. So whatever use you might bring to this block, you either got to structure enough to meet it all during the day, or you have to have some offset use. And so, for example, residential wouldn't be a good combination use because the heavy use parking is in the evening, the same time as the Covey Center, evening and weekend. So office makes more sense, hospitality maybe makes more sense, but residential would be a challenge unless you could build a parking structure. So again, that's where we get into these sort of fine-grained details about how we might use this property in the future.
One of the considerations that the committee was talking about too is you look at the parcel here. Can I borrow that?
Yeah.
So as you look at the parcel, the architect suggested that we talked about, where to structure and things. The architect said, you've got this, what do you call it, aerial view, line of sight?
Line of sight.
And he said, you don't want to put a building structure in there, but if the city were to build here and have some parking here, whatever redevelopment that took place on this block could, by negotiation, include some structured parking over here in order to provide additional as needed. But those are slightly longer term options.
Really, at the end of the day, it doesn't change the size of the bond. It just it defines where you spend the money and how, but it doesn't necessarily increase the total cost of the bond.
And the other thing that option 3 includes is that the fire station number 1 right here would actually go away, and that it would be part of the new public safety building.
And for your benefit, the fire station there, we call it the fire station, but really it's an ambulance bay, right? There's some sleeping quarters and things, plus the fire administration, which already would move. But all you would be doing is taking essentially this section and incorporating it somehow into a building there, along with some sleeping quarters for the ambulance crew.
Question. So the building on the southeast corner, isn't the majority of the use right now the community development?
In terms
Yes.
of total square footage, it's probably, probably the majority.
Probably 1.5.
Not a
Fire
enormous
admin
majority.
Probably 3/4 of it.
Small fire admin.
Yeah. Do you mind if we take you down to the mall for a minute and show you
Can I
some of the
ask,
considerations
while you're
there?
getting there, can I ask Eric a question? We have been pretty good on our bonding in the past. And what's our rating? Double A?
Double A plus.
Double A plus?
One
And
step below AAA.
It's one step
Below AAA.
Excellent for a municipality our size.
And we're looking at the potential of 25 million for a sewer treatment plant.
I know there's also been some discussion about possibly building this treatment plant with trains, kind of staging at the time and doing
Staging it. What's it going to do to our bond rating as we go forward on this? What are our potentials? What are we looking at some of those things?
Well, I would say, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we've tried to be careful and tried to manage our debt conservatively. And through the issuance of, for example, if we were to do a city center bond, I don't feel like that would have.
So that's why you say 3.5%.
Well, 3.5% is the interest rate.
But that's
we're assuming
based
that
on
our bond
our
rating
rating.
would stay the same, that it wouldn't change. Now, if we continue to issue debt and had huge amounts of debt, it could have some impact. But there are a lot of factors that go in. I mean, the overall median income in Provo affects it. The local economy does. Also, our financial performance, our debt coverage ratios, our payment history. It's a long list of items. But and as you know, we've got our debt management policy, which is part of our financial policies. But what we would do is we would want to take and look at each issue or whatever we were looking at and make sure we take that into consideration. But the other thing that happens with general obligation debt is you have something that's called a legal debt margin. And our legal debt margin right now is less than 25% of what it could be, and so we've been conservative.
So maybe you've already answered this question, but in response to concerns that, hey, maybe we should just wait until we've paid off the rec center and we're in we've paid off more of our debt, what would your response to that be? I mean, obviously that has to be weighed against the urgency of the situation, but financially speaking.
Well, I think what the rating agencies are concerned about, the bondholders are concerned about, is that they're going to get paid, they're going to get paid on time, and that the city has the ability to do that. So my biggest concern would be the impact on the residents, okay? And is this going to be something that they can afford? Is it something that they want to do? And that's one of the nice things about an election is you give the residents an opportunity to vote and decide what they want to do. But to me, that's the biggest impact. I feel like right now I don't have a big concern about having two general obligation issues out there. That's happened in the past. We used to have road bonds that we would issue debt for, and then of course for a short period of time we had
the rec center and the library were paid off shortly after that. But I feel like we would be fine, but you just want to make sure that the net result is the residents and their property taxes, and so that would be what I would be most sensitive about.
Comment? So how many times, I mean, if we don't bond this November and we waited a year or 2 or 3, we've already got how many increases announced by the Fed for the interest rate? And going down in the future, if it's a 0.5% higher, if it's 1% higher, the interest rate.
We've already seen that over the last year, and so we've seen rates going up, and we're estimating 3.5%. And prior issues we were in the 2s, okay, and so we're seeing that, and so that does drive up the cost as well.
I was hoping I could clarify something about fire station number 1. Second of all, and I understand what Mr. Strachan was saying. It's not solely an ambulance bay. During a structure fire, they respond out. They're cross-staffed, and they respond out on a squad, and they respond to every structure fire in the city. And then in the downtown, when there's an EMS call, they take the ambulance, and then they back up the rest of the ambulances that are in the city. So there are actually 2 units that respond out of there for 2 different emergency purposes. Second, there's a battalion chief that is on duty at that station, and they serve as the commander for the entire city, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So the need for fire administration and the need for a fire station is probably more significant than was just portrayed, and so it's a much greater service that comes out of Station 1 in emergency response than just an ambulance bay.
Thank you.
So take no indication from who speaks about what as to what anybody's preferences are, but we thought we should also talk a little bit about the mall option a little bit more, because some concerns had been raised. The 2 parts of the mall property are this property and the tire battery accessory building. One of the concerns that have been raised have been whether or not, the seismic situation for that building. It is not currently seismically set for a police station, and so that would have to be upgraded. And it's my understanding that the numbers that we presented for those costs are to bring it up to that proper standard. Because the city would own this property alone, we are not, some of the characterizations on the property in terms of a city acquisition is that the city would be a tenant to the mall. We would not be a tenant to the mall. We would own the property. Another aspect of that is that with respect to the police and fire, the concern has been raised about what happens if you have, say, a sex offender coming to the police station, say over here, and some have speculated that there's a 1,000-foot limit, which would take you almost to the other end of the mall. We've checked in law, there is no 1,000-foot limit. Basically, offenders are told they're not to go to certain areas, but things like schools, preschools, daycares, things like that. The mall is quite aware that if the police station was to be in this building, that they would not, that would become one of those limited uses. They could not have a daycare, preschool, or anything like that that would be as part of the restricted list. And so those are important considerations. In terms of, one of the concerns that have been raised is about whether or not, if the concern was in terms of the design to try and prevent protests in the mall against city issues and things like that, you would design in such a way to try and minimize that possibility. And so from the mall's perspective, it might be a little less advantageous if we're not actually having access in and out of the building from inside the mall. And one of the advantages of having a city hall is that there's a lot of extra traffic coming to a city hall, especially one where all our services are in the same spot. And those are things that are of concern. So, some of the concerns that that were been raised, we tried to assess whether or not they were, they're all legitimate. The question is whether or not they could be designed, or whether they're, where they are in the issues. So we feel like in terms of the design that with proper design layout and entrances and things like that, the concerns that have been raised can all more or less be mitigated going forward in the mall option.
Question about the responsibility for common areas. Do we have any?
Between the mall and...
Between the mall, for example, some of the parking there.
I think you'd have to define that in whatever agreement you have, because obviously if the property, and we haven't got too much into that discussion, but obviously the property that belongs to the city and belongs to the mall, the resident or business coming to the mall or coming to the city center isn't going to distinguish. And so I think you'd have to work on, you know, whatever maintenance issues that would arise for those parking lots. If you were to say put a police department right here in terms of their parking, you'd fence it in, and that probably would become a city responsibility. So there'd be discussions that would have to go on. Bryce, one of the questions that came up was whether or not there is a police station or a city center at a mall. Anybody that went to, or people were invited to go to an open house at the mall yesterday or Friday, and they brought in someone from the Oceanside Police Department, and I wanted to see what this link was and opened it up.
Sorry.
So Oceanside, California has a police department. They don't have the city hall, but they have a police department in a essentially a strip mall. And some of the similar parameters here. You can see that here there's a freeway right next to the mall complex. There's an additional shopping complex over here, and everything else around it is shopping with some housing up here. If you were to go in and actually look at, Bryce, can you pull up the pictures?
Which one?
There should have been pictures on that thing.
Oh, I just got one. These ones?
Yeah, go down a little bit on that box. Go down, down, down. See right down there, there's some pictures. Just click on those pictures and then just scroll us through. So you can see essentially that they have parking lot facing access to all of these buildings. One of the things I was impressed with was the quality of their secured parking over here. But if you were to play with it, and I'll let you go do it on your own, but if you were to play with it and follow down around the parking through Google Maps, you can drive through. This area at the one end is all police stuff. As you get further on over here, there is dentist offices and then more shopping over here. And then somewhere, I think it was maybe right here, there's like a dollar store and a bunch of small shops. So they have shopping in the vicinity right there. So it's not unusual. I mean, it's probably not the most usual thing, but there are exceptions that says that you have police departments at shopping centers.
How big is the police department that's housed out of that, do you know?
I don't know, but looking at the pictures, they dominate this whole section right here.
It's bigger than Provo's.
Looks like the population of the city is 175,000.
And that is, but they got precincts, is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I don't know that answer,
minimize this.
but their police department is a significant portion of that shopping area. And then as you look through, you know, there's a gas station right here. This had a diner, and I think there was a dentist office. There were some smaller offices in here, and then most of the retail shopping is here, and then again over at this mall. So.
Chief Ferguson's not here, and I don't know if anyone has talked to him. I've been curious to know if his opinion has shifted at all, if he feels...
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that we got information from the architect that he had been talking to and outlined their concerns, and really what they're saying is the architect still had some concerns, but acknowledged that, you know, most of these are design issues, and we better recognize that if we go to the mall option, that the mall better recognize that there's certain uses they can't have in the mall, and then in terms of upgrades, we do have to make sure that we get to an occupancy factor 4 according to the seismic requirements, and something called the International Building Code requires a 1.5 importance factor to public safety occupancies. So can you go back to the mall building, Bryce?
Ours?
Yeah, Provo's Mall. So even though on the concept maps that you've seen, you know, only about half of the building upstairs and most of the, a good part of the basement would be police. The entire separate building that is the Sears building would have to be structurally upgraded to a level 4 times 1.5.
I'm Captain John Guyman from the Police Department, representing Chief Ferguson. He couldn't be here today in a civil service hearing. His opinion hasn't changed.
Okay.
And you've done a good job of outlining our concerns at the mall. I'd just be cautious about using Oceanside before we know, was it specifically built as a public safety building, or was it moved into an existing facility like we're talking down at the mall? Is it a precinct? Is it their main building? Is it a substation? So
fair question.
That's what I'd be concerned about there. But his opinion hasn't changed. I talked to him on the phone just before he came down here. So if you have any other questions, you can direct them to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, I just wanted to give you that other perspective as you're looking at your choices. If you're willing, we're ready to give you kind of an update on what we did with Open City Hall.
Okay.
Okay, Bryce, can you pull up that presentation? Karen's going to do most of this, but I want to let you know what we did. We reached out into the community. We sent out a neighborhood-focused newsletter. We did a newsletter called Policy Matters that some of you have seen. Number of posts on Twitter, many on Facebook, the mayor's blog, the mayor's emails have gone out, Facebook, Twitter, and the mayor's on the mayor's side. Also, we sent a number of announcements out to Open City Hall subscribers. We did that twice. There's 788 subscribers in the city on that. We did a special page on the website where many of you can see the videos. And then a whole bunch of emails to our neighborhood chairs and vice chairs to share their list and get the word out. A word of caution to you that, like any open house, Open City Hall is not scientific. What we do is we get data from people who essentially are interested in self-select. Aside from the Y2 analytics work that was done earlier, there's been nothing that's been a scientific survey of the city. So this is opinion of people who are interested and have self-selected themselves to participate. The other thing that was done was there was the open houses that we had, and I can't speak for the ones the mall hosted, but the ones the city hosted, as many as people that came, we only had 11 comments. And the 11 comments that came in were all basically in favor of doing something. In other words, they vote for an option for a bond to do something to improve our situation. And I'll turn you over to Karen now for more.
Pass along. Oh.
I'll pass this out now.
Okay, on Open City Hall, we had 216 registered participants that took the survey. Of those, 210 were Provo residents and 6 from outside of Provo. So I pulled together just the basics of just from the Provo residents on that survey. So option 1, 89 yes, 78 no, and 43 not sure. Option 2, 33 yes, 110 no, and 66 not sure. Option 3, 128 yes, 37 no, 45 not sure. And then at the end, there's a part where you can prioritize the options according to your preferences. And option 3 was ranked at the top with 122 that put it first, 59 ranked at second, 4 ranked at third. Option 1 came in second, and then option 2. So it just kind of gives you a basic overview from participants. A good majority of people that took the survey, it was their first time on Open City Hall, which is encouraging to me that they're paying attention and everything. And then, as Cliff mentioned, we did some surveys at the open houses. Of the 11 who filled something out, 11 were very likely to vote yes to a bond, 2 preferred the mall option, and 9 the rebuilding of City Hall option. And then we got quite a variety of emails, and I did the best I could to just kind of get a basic idea of what their preferences were. And it kind of follows along the same thing. The option 3 seemed to be more popular with people. Option 1 still had a lot of people just not seeing a lot of support for option 2, and as has been mentioned, a lot of comments mentioned that that people would rather see it done right, whatever direction we go, that they'd like to see it last. I think they liked the idea of an investment, but there were a handful of people who definitely did not like the idea of a bond at all or raising taxes in any way, and it's unfortunate we're up against so many other competing factors, and we got into a few interesting discussions regarding some of those priorities, but we all have critical needs, and so I sent out to each of you the overall comments and everything. They are a lot to wade through, but they are really enlightening. It's nice to see how people came to the conclusion, because just saying option 1, 2, or 3 doesn't tell you a whole lot. And I can tell you there's obviously a lot of love for the downtown area in general. I did want to say something to try to address an ongoing argument that's happening on Facebook right now, that there are some neighborhood chairs that I know reached out to you, and vice chairs that indicated their preference, and they were speaking only as themselves, not representing their neighborhoods, except for Quinn Peterson, who did have a vote by his board in what they wanted to support, of course. But this is causing quite a bit of division online, and I never like to see neighborhood chairs and vice chairs attacked for their service to us. But just to be clear, those are their personal opinions, with the exception of Quinn Peterson representing his group. But we did get a lot of response, and I'm always happy to see that.
Can I have a comment on demographics? On the open city hall, as we looked at, we wanted to see if the participation was localized or generally within certain age groups. With respect to age, we found it, the largest group, of course, is the 34, 45, I think was the range. But the bell curve, really did look kind of like this, with this being the older folks and this being the younger folks. But the middle demographic of, say 30s to 50s seemed to be the highest participating in that. In terms of neighborhoods, there were a few neighborhoods who didn't look like anybody participated, but generally the participation in the open city hall poll was across the city. A little bit heavier in the downtowns and surrounding neighborhoods. Provost was heavily represented, as was north of Pleasant View, I think. But there was participation from virtually every neighborhood in the city on that poll.
And if any of you have questions or want my help in looking, there are ways to look at the different answers and find the different groups on Open City Hall, and I'd be happy to walk you through it. Yes?
So the 11 said very likely to vote for a bond.
Yes.
However, that's after they were educated about
yes.
the need. Because it seemed like when we first went out and just said to people, would you vote for a bond? And they were like,
who's going to say yes?
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know, 2/3 to 3/4 saying no way. So I'm not sure how that factors in when you have this reluctant group. And then you say, okay, we finally are going to propose something. If they've bought into the need, are they into it for a penny or a pound? As in, do they vote for want the cheaper one or the more expensive one? And we saw, at least with that they seem to be okay with spending the big dollars.
Well, we did hear back from people who didn't like the length of the survey. It was a bit much to go through, but it's because we decided to educate people along the way and not just have a simple A, B, or C poll. And when you explain that to people, they actually were okay with that. They understood the purpose. But that may have led to less participation than if we just said, where do you want it? And they could pin something on a map, or they could just say, option 1, 2, or 3, but that seemed unfair without people having a chance to understand what each option presented, pros and cons, and that.
Education does remain an important factor in this, and to go to Councillor Harding's earlier comments and questions about timing and dates, if the council is to vote to put a bond question out there after selecting one of these options, the education becomes very, very important. And we talked about previously about, the city can't use its resources to campaign, so there'll be groups probably organizing around it. Somebody needs to champion it, somebody's probably going to oppose it. That's, I think, inevitable in any bond election. But the dates, we talked about the dates from the 22nd of August to November 6th, the election is only 75 days. In reality, we have less time than that. So education and getting the message out becomes very, very important. The reason that is because mail-in ballots are going to be mailed out around October 16th, right? So essentially, you've got about 3 weeks less before people start getting their ballots and making their decisions on who to vote for and what ballot questions to choose.
So I'm going to go back to my earlier concern about the longevity question and operating cost questions, because it seems to me that the natural reaction that anybody has, right, is the price tag just all by itself without any sense of context of what the price is, what it is an investment in terms of the overall cost. So I'm concerned that whatever we end up deciding, that narrative, where are we going to make sure that narrative is given to people if people are just reacting to a number as opposed to a story and an investment or a actually, I think Dave Sewell's phrased it differently than I did, and I preferred it. I mean, it's an actual cost when we're looking at operating costs and we're looking at the lifespan of a building. So I'm a little concerned that,
well, I think there's
up to this point, even in the public discussion, it seems like that hasn't been front and center. And I mentioned this, a couple of months ago. I mean, the only thing I can compare it to in my personal finances is buying a house and buying a car. The big financial decisions, and when I make those decisions, I'm sure a price tag is relevant in the monthly expenses and everything. But I'm also thinking about what kind of longevity is this getting me, and am I going to turn around and have to make the same decision, in a short period of time when I would much prefer something that's the operating costs are going to be lower and the longevity is going to be longer. That's central to any major financial decision, and I'm not seeing that in the public discourse to the degree that I'd like, and I'm worried that that's all that shows up on the bond.
Yeah, right? No, you're right, and I think what has to happen is there has to be some dissemination of information and provision. And the two people to your left both have experience with bond elections, and I would defer to them on how you get that out and what our limitations are. But absolutely, if the council wants a bond question on the ballot and they want it to be successful, there's got to be a concerted education effort, because as the numbers have shown, when the public is aware of the situation, understands why we're asking the question, they tend to be on board, supportive. So can we just defer to to Wayne and Michelle and see if there's...
Just a quick question. The price, you're talking operations and maintenance savings over the years for the new building. And then option 1, did we factor in any value that would be a savings because we sell the block?
I don't believe we have, but that really is a long-term problem that you do have is, if we move off, if we decide not to use the mall option 25 years from now and go somewhere else, now we have an asset that we can have to figure out something to do with. Just like we have this block right now,
right,
which is an asset.
And this block, depending on how you look at it, is a real positive that could be redeveloped and help downtown. But I'm just saying option 1, if you're just looking at total real cost, you have to say, well, okay, over time, we get something back out of this block, which may offset the cheaper O&M.
Yeah, and another, I mean, this is even more vague, I think, and more unlikely to be able to calculate responsibly, but the impact on downtown, right? I've heard debates on both sides, right? That if we vacate this area and we create space for retail, for mixed use and so on, maybe that's better for downtown. Of course, a lot of the downtown people feel pretty strongly in favor of the city center here. But that's another factor in terms of the overall economics. So that may be less direct than the operating costs and the longevity of the building, but it's certainly part of the equation.
One nice problem that we have is that both the folks at the mall and the folks downtown want the city center there, so it's better than me to say, please go somewhere else.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that on record here.
So we've given you now all the information that I think that we had prepared to give you, and you still have another 36 minutes in the scheduled time for this meeting, with the expectation that you go home, think about things, and then tomorrow at the work session have another hour to decide on an option if you're ready to do that.
Dave, go ahead and then get some things.
Okay, I just wanted really quick, and I guess Karen's back at her desk, but just looking at the data, I think everything that's been recorded were the registered participants, but Karen shared also the unregistered participants, and I looked at that feeling a little wary that the unregistered, we might have, might have people voting multiple times, we might have people voting from outside of the city. You might get kind of some activists, is kind of what I was worried about, that we might get, I don't know what this is, but I'll pass it along.
Take one of each.
One of each, thank you. I was pleasantly surprised that that's not what I saw when I looked at the unregistered. The unregistered actually mirrors the trends of the registered quite well, except there's more not sures than the registered. And I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting more people, you get kind of activists, like, yes on this and no on the others, yes on this and no on the others. But a lot of the unregistered were unsure. And so I thought that was very interesting, and it might be worthwhile looking through the unregistered results as well. But again, I think they pretty much followed the trend of the registered. The other thing that I looked at that I found interesting, just kind of doing some number crunching. So what we've got here is the blue bars are the yeses, the yellow bars are the not sures, and the red bar is no. And then we go from 3 yeses, or 3 answers, 2 answers, 1 answer, and 0 answer. So the way to look at this is that first bar is 17. So 17 out of the 219 people said, yes, I'm willing to support any of the 3 bonds, or all 3, I'm willing to support all 3 bonds. You also have 28 who said they did not mark yes on any of the 3. But only 3 people said no to all 3. So the difference there are the people who said not sure. But that kind of gives you an idea of kind of how people were coming into this. 11 people said, I'm not sure to all 3 of them. The highest bar there are the people that said, I'll say yes to one option, not option 1, but one of the options, and only one of the options. That's the highest. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting way to kind of look at the data that came in, looking a little bit deeper at that. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
I've got a question about timing and how to deal with this as we go forward. I am concerned. If we decide to not put it on, how far out are we? Are we going to say, I don't care anymore what the school board says. They're going to go after $200 million. We're going to do it next year if we feel like we need a little more time. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot by waiting a year, or do we have a chance? I mean, I'm going to say it public, I'm disappointed in what the school board has done to us this
We haven't
year.
heard any council people saying they want to put it off.
Well, and I've heard public say that they want to wait.
Oh, we don't.
Well, they're the ones that are going to ultimately vote on this. And
Yeah,
so,
but the question there is, do we do a good job in selling the bond?
and can we do that in the amount of time we've got? That's one thing because in the past, when I look at what we did at the rec center, we attacked this for 9 months. Here we've got 60 days. Mayor,
A lot of work.
it is a lot of work, and we're going to be relying mostly on the administration, I think. You can't, I mean, we're going to need help.
Yeah, so we're not afraid of hard work in my office. In fact, that's what we do. So we're ready. We're ready to go when you're ready to go, and we're anxious. And I've talked with my staff, and Wayne is really good at this as well. But we know what it takes to pass a bond, and it's going to take a lot of education and a lot of work. And you have to get out. You have to get on your feet and get out and knock doors and talk to people and go to book club meetings where there's 4 people and not feel like it's a disappointment, because it's not. Those 4 people are critical, and you educate them and they educate 4 people, and it goes from there. But
Have we got business people? Have we got people at New Skin and all these other places that are willing to jump on board with this?
It's interesting, a lot of people want to know where we're going. So we've got to make step 1 happen. And once that decision's made, then there's buy-in, but everyone...
They want to know.
I don't blame them. I don't want to support it if I'm a business owner until I know which option we're going with, because I might have strong opinions about 1, 2, or 3. And so we really are at a crossroads where a decision has to be made. We're on a tight timeline. I look at Karen and I just think with the neighborhood it's going to be a lot of work, but it's doable. It's very doable. And the reason it's doable is because I see the need, the passion. We need public safety. We need these things. If it was something we didn't need, then I'd have a hard time getting behind it for however many days we have before October 16th the ballots go out, because you've got to, everyone's going to have to work here. So everyone's got to be committed. But it's doable. I mean, this is just a small sampling. What did we have, 215 that we went off? I mean, think about our population. That's just such a small sampling. And I've already been out talking. In fact, I think that's all I talk about right now, is this bond. And the citizens are anxious. They want us to make a decision. And that's the best part about who we are, because we're all elected officials. We're who the public wanted. We're who the public trusts. We're who the public has pushed forward to make the hard decisions. And that's part of our job. That's why we're here in these seats. So we need to not be afraid and not shy away from that. If it's something that we know is the right thing to do, and we know it's time to do it, then we need to not shy away from that and do it. Step up and do what we were elected for.
Thank you.
So for those people who are saying that they would like to wait in public, did you hear why they would prefer to wait? Would they be more likely to vote for it in the future?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the potential $225 million sewer treatment plant, a $71 increase on property taxes for the school board potential this year, and all those things. And I don't know that that's ever going to go away. That's the frustrating part to me, is I look what we do this year, what we're going to do next year. We waited last year, and look where we are.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's any
This is
sweet spot. And the longer you wait, the higher the interest rates are promised to go by the feds.
And there's the option, people that are saying, do half of it this year and half of it next year, or 10 years down the road. Those are things that I'm hearing, and I think that we're going to have to come up with the answers and the education to say why we've done what we've done.
Well, there are big risks, right, in not doing anything.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's also part of the cost balance, right? Is you're looking at doing nothing versus doing something and then figuring out what is the something that you think you might want to do. But I think that's part of the public education as well.
So, Mr. Chair, one question I've heard in that regard has to do with, have we looked at possible other downtown locations as part of this process? I've heard some concerning
In
space.
fact, Wayne, will you address that for us?
Yeah, so let me raise just a couple of them that we've heard about, but let me preface it by saying if option 3 were selected, I don't think we have a preconceived notion that the buildings would have to be built on this block. We think they would have to be built downtown if that's the council's intent, but it may actually be more advantageous to us to look at doing some kind of land trade and building on a different 2-block area in downtown and trade for this property that might accommodate some of Councilmember Harding's concerns about being constrained into one particular corner on the block. That being said, let me raise a number of the issues that have been questioned. So first is the former state courts building, or the one that will be vacated in January when the new state courts building is occupied. That building's about 68,000 square feet. We looked very hard at that for the potential of a public safety building. At the time, the state courts determined to build their new building. We actually approached the state about acquiring that building once it was vacated. The answer we got was, thank you very much, but the state building board has other state purposes that they'd like to occupy that space for, so it's not for sale. We thought about condemning, and then we thought we did not have very good luck with that issue, and so we kind of walked away from that. But nonetheless, it would have only met public safety's needs, and only approximately would not have been a good long-term solution for public safety. There were some advantages. There's a sally port in the building. There are holding cells. But the remodeling cost was pretty substantial as well, just as we looked at trying to retrofit the building for a public safety building. So we kind of demurred on that one. We did spend a lot of time looking at the former Ancestry.com building up in the Riverwoods, and concluded that because of some constraints in the building, particularly ceiling height, would have been very restrictive, and we would have likely had to build at least a city council chambers to add on to that building. And by the time you bought the building, added that on, it was almost the cost of building new to accommodate that. And so again, we walked away from that one after giving it several weeks of very thorough look. You know, if there were another downtown building that was available and that had sufficient square footage, I think we would be happy to take a look at that. Some of you know there was actually an aggressive effort a couple of years ago to look at the former, or at the current county courthouse, the historic county courthouse, and see if that could work. The problem is there's, as big as that building looks like, there's only 35,000 square feet in the building, and so it didn't come anywhere close to meeting either City Hall or public safety's needs. Again, without substantial remodel and then affecting the historic character of the building. So we walked away from that one as well. So again, we've tried to look at other alternatives in both existing buildings and space downtown, and where we kind of landed. And again, I'll just articulate again, as we did in the public open houses, why now as opposed to 2 years ago or 2 years from now. And I think in part it was because we recognized that this option of the Sears building at the mall would not last forever. At some point, if the city were to think that was a serious consideration, but we waited 2 years while we looked at other alternatives, that option might be gone. And it was a pretty cost-effective solution that we didn't really want to let escape without doing a really thorough job. Secondly, we heard loud and clear from the police department that the inadequacy of their current facility is a significant problem. It's a problem in working conditions, it's a problem in maintenance costs, and it's a problem in attracting and recruiting officers to come to work. And the third thing I think that we concluded was the longer we wait as the economy continues to be relatively hot, and concerns about interest rates, the longer we waited, the more expensive each unit of construction would become and the more expensive bonding costs would become. And Peter may have one more that he wants to add, but those were the kind of the key factors that pushed us into today.
For my own amusement, I opened up our final 2013 study, and when we add in everything, including the municipal court, we were at approximately $48 million for everything, including the court. Now we're talking 68 plus million, excluding the court.
Right.
If we could have gone back in time and spent 48 million 5 years ago, would we have thought we made a wise choice then? And I say we, that's not fair for me to do. I'm not a resident of Provo City. But as an outside reviewer of this, I'm just heartsick over what I'm seeing is happening in construction inflation. And it's just gut-wrenching to go back to clients and say, you've got to find more money because of what we're seeing unfolding. And it's, unfortunately, we're in a boom economy and there's no sign of when this is going to abate. I wish I could tell you.
So we struck a very sweet spot at the rec center. We built the rec center at the peak of the downturn, the economic downturn. We got great construction prices and great interest rates. You know, again, in retrospect, if we'd gone back 5 years, which is about the time the rec center opened 5 years ago, and so we were in construction 6.5 years ago, that was surely the ideal time to build a building of that scale and scope. And now's not an ideal time, but again, we're not sure we see anything on the horizon that convinces us that we might have a better option. And so again, I think there's a lot of factors that are kind of conspiring to push us into a relatively tight time constraint.
I mean, Wayne, and so as you talk about this, we don't want to constrain ourselves to these 2 blocks, is basically one of the things.
Well, I think the concern is if the council's prerogative, if option 3 is something that you feel strongly about, and you want to make a commitment to keep it in the downtown, we should include that in the bond language, that the facility would be built in the downtown. Obviously, the broader the bond language, the more flexibility we have to address concerns as they come up over the next several months, and even into, if the bond were to pass, even in the next year. I think you want to maintain flexibility so you can make the wisest economic decision and operational decision.
And does that go back to the thing that we said, trust me?
Well, there will always be some of that. You know, there will always be some of that. Now, with the rec center, we had the advantage of having gone through an 18-month public process in which many of those decisions could be fleshed out. All we're doing right now, as Peter would tell you, is trying to define what it would cost to build any of these 3 options, so you know what to put on the ballot. The precise makeup of how big the office is and how many conference rooms and all of that sort of thing is really left to the design process. And so again, I think we would want to look at, again, if the commitment were made to keep it downtown, we would want to look at all of our available options for doing exactly that and come back with the best available option for the council to choose. So again, the more constraining you make the ballot language, in one sense it gives more certainty to the voters, but it also constrains your ability to make good representative decisions later in the process. So again, it's a delicate balance to try to strike, and we hope to help you do that.
Let me go to this Dave first, and then you can.
Okay, and I think Wayne said a lot of what I was going to say. I think with what we did, maybe we erred a little bit too much on saying option 3 is building it in the current spot. Right. I would hate to alienate or frustrate some people who've said, like, hey, I weighed in, and I weighed in because this is what we said. And the mayor, mentioned some people are still sitting on the sidelines, and they want to see, where is it going. I think we need to kind of strike the right balance, but I'm hopeful that we can kind of broaden the scope of the location a little bit to take advantage of opportunities that may exist elsewhere in the downtown if we go that direction. I wanted to address the kind of the question of timing as well. I do feel like, I've got a lot of reading to do tonight of all the comments, but I do feel like we are in a good position to make an informed decision between the 3 options. And I feel that if we're looking at breaking ground fall of 2019, that gives us being the city, enough time to go through and find, what the right, so I don't feel like we're rushing that. I don't necessarily feel like we're rushing the decision between the different options. To me, the only question is that enough time for education? And that is a good question. But it's great to hear the mayor, address that, and I'm committed to it as well. And I have seen people say, well, let's put this off for a year or two because it's too pressing right now. But I feel like that's perhaps what happened in 2013 and 2014. And it's like we want to do it. Oh, nothing looks just right. But as soon as you put it off, as soon as we don't have a deadline, then it slips for a few more years, and then we have to redo the studies. And so I think now is the time. I think we can make a good decision tomorrow about what option, and I think by fall next year, I think we'll be ready.
Okay, and then we have a comment back there, I think. But first, I just wanted to ask, or if we're looking at other places downtown, you have to look at what's there, and are they a willing seller?
Yes.
And there's only one place I know of that's vacant and ready to develop into something, and that's the R.C. Willie block. I don't know if that was looked at.
Well, let me just say we've looked at lots of things, and there are probably more things to look at than we have looked so far. But again, I would hate for the location on these two physical blocks to be a defining decision at this stage of the game. And again, we have, once the decision's made to put something on the ballot, you do have some time between now and mid-October in which to flesh out some of these other details, and certainly if the voters have confidence and are willing to move forward with the bond election, we'll have time beyond that. But again, I think we want to, again, I think Councilmember Harding said, we want to strike the balance. There have been other taxing entities in our community that have sold bonds and then come up with new opportunities that cause them to do things that were never contemplated in the bond. I don't think you want to go to that level. We've had some in our history where that's been a challenge. By the same token, I don't think you want to entirely close the door to opportunities to make a wiser decision with the resources that are committed to you by the voters. And so again, it's trying to strike that comfortable balance. And again, if downtown's a priority, I think we ought to say it in the bond language. If that's a key factor for you. If there's other factors, we ought to put them in the bond language. But again, I'd be reluctant to be overly constraining as things develop over the next several months.
Jerry?
Yes, George.
Fall 2019 for the mall also, or is that?
Well, again, we think the timing, because the mall would be a much faster build, largely because we're doing exterior improvements, not substantial renovation, and we're doing a remodeling of the space. We think that can actually be done in a much shorter time frame, probably a year or less.
So why would we start earlier? Why would we start this fall or next spring?
Well, you certainly could at the mall. The question is, if you've got to design a new building and go through all the civil and architectural work, we don't think you're going to be bidding until next summer.
But the mall could be...
The mall could be done in a much shorter time frame, for sure.
I just thought it was understood that everything would be the same, but my thought would be earlier.
No, absolutely. And I think our matrix suggested that we could be in and out of the mall in 12 to 18 months. And we would probably not be even into construction for 9 or 10 months of next year.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think the longevity of option number 3 was listed as 30 plus.
Yes.
Is there any reason why that seems a little conservative to me, especially if you're talking about adding that extra square footage? I mean, are we conceivably looking at 40 plus?
We could. When we did the space needs study, we asked the architect in both the public safety and the city hall period to look, I think, at a 2030 horizon for space needs. And so again, our thinking was it's probably fair to say
that number was based on space needs, but not on longevity of the structure itself.
Correct.
And think about this, where we're at right now. This building, the bond was in 1968, the building opened in 1972. I don't think when they opened this building, they projected we'd be this many years into this same building.
And 120,000 population compared to 45 where it was when we started. Peter?
On the back page of the handout you received, it actually talks about how we envision putting the building together for materials. And what you'll find there is we put significant dollars into things that will fail or that we need to make sure last for a while. And we try to be very economical on the aesthetic elements. So we look for a building that would, a building design, whoever designs it, we look for a building design that would be proper but not overdone, would have the bones, the infrastructure to last for a really good long time. And I think that's the differentiation we want to make, is that we didn't put in cheap systems that would fail and have to be replaced, but we also didn't put in like stone exteriors, which, beautiful as they might be, is dollars we just didn't feel like Provo City could afford to spend. I don't know if that answers your question. In theory, we spent a lot of time looking at this building and saying, we don't want to do this to any city ever again.
Did that also include energy savings in terms of operating costs? Were you looking at the environmental design of the building in a way to reduce costs over the long term?
Well, first and foremost, working for Nexus, everything.
And this would be for either option, actually.
Right. Everything we touch goes as far green as you will let us take it, for sustainability and for quality materials. We're obsessed by that position. We built in, when you look at the systems costs, the electrical costs, mechanical costs on those systems, we built in infrastructure to support like a PV array down the future, whatever elements you are willing to step up to. The building budget is designed to accommodate.
Just really quick, could we apply for a C-PACE?
It's a very good question. I think we're exempt from taxation, and so it probably makes it not quite as valuable as it would be otherwise, but we can certainly look at it.
Just a quick question. You said it's designed for a very long time. Does that mean 50 or more years, or can you?
In the civic work that I do, 50 is a minimum. Okay, some of you may know the Matheson Courthouse in downtown Salt Lake. That's been up 20, and it's just barely beginning to show its age. And built for $117.50 a square foot.
And that's a good, I appreciate that last statement there too, because what are we looking at? $350 a square foot here?
Yeah, in some cases more, depending on the.
Yeah, and I know that I had a friend say, well, the hospital is a good, and it's not. It's not a good comparable. It's not a good comparable.
And Peter, do you want to address the construction cost question?
We went back and forth, benchmarking this facility against multiple facilities, both nationally and locally. I worked with Construction Control Corporation, who specializes in construction costs. The project management is pretty much all they do, and we benchmark our numbers against virtually, well, lots of comparables. Once we did that, we actually dialed down the Provo numbers slightly, which Construction Control was a little uncomfortable about, but I felt like they were being a little bit too aggressive, I guess is the choice of words. We are sitting at the low end of comfortable for raw building costs. And the basic raw building cost is about $260 a square foot. I hate to tell you that is really a tough envelope to get into right now, and a year from now will be tougher. And that's why we've got some of the contingencies and some of the other numbers we've put into the estimates. Where's John? He's hiding from me. There you are. Even this morning, we were going back and forth on this exact topic, because I don't want to create a bond number that is so outrageous that voters will not support it. That doesn't do anybody any good. We also don't want to create a bond number that in the end we realize we can't achieve what you want to build. That would be a different type of disaster. So we spent a lot of time on this topic, I promise you.
My biggest concern about the 50-year horizon is just whether we've allowed for enough growth around it. You know, it's so hard to know exactly what's going to happen with growth in the city, growth in the west side, growth in downtown. And then also sometimes the growth in the city doesn't follow. There may be efficiencies, there may be ways that we actually reduce government rather than increase, but it is an unknown, and that's my biggest concern, is just whether or not, we've tried to provide some adequate growth, and 12,000 square feet seems like a lot, but that's just a little bit of an unknown that I'm nervous about.
So a related question to that is the extra 12,000 or 17,000, that might not necessarily take us out 50 years, but could we have a contingency plan, like a certain portion of the parking lot or something that we could expand into if we needed to, or something like that?
We should look at that again. The 12,000, 17,000 gross square feet is roughly 10% of the project size. And so if you kind of think about that, if you think our workforce is going to grow by more than 10%, again, I would exclude police from that. While they might have a larger increase in workload, they also don't consume as much per square foot per officer, largely because they're on the road a lot. And so if you just think about that, I think it's a pretty reasonable number to put in as contingency. And again, the space would not be free to move into because it's unfinished. And so you're still going to have to make a capital expenditure decision to expand into that property. And so it's there's sort of a built-in hurdle to get over before you would jump into that space. So again, I think I'd argue it's a pretty reasonable number and anticipates a real important need to move into that space before you move into it.
One of the questions I've had, we put a limit on the mall space at 20 years, basically.
Right, and again, our general thinking was that was about the period of our space needs analysis, plus it's a 20-year-old building today. And so our thinking was that this would be a 20-year bond. It'd probably get us 20 years, maybe a little further than that before we'd have to make a substantial investment again in the building. And so again, I think that was in part space needs analysis, in part age of building. And again, when you build a new building, you certainly get far more than 20 years out of that. And this building is a good example. It was built 46 years ago, and we're still here, and it's still barely functional. We're knocking on the door of either needing to make a substantial investment in the building or consider building new. And I think as Councilmember Handley suggested, we're at that point where we're looking at the used car and trying to say, number one, should we put the new transmission in? Should we replace the motor? And even then, we still only have 5 seats in the old sedan, and our family's grown to the point now where we need a minivan. And so what do we do with that decision? It's a size decision as well as a functionality decision. And I think we are kind of facing that somewhat analogous to the family decision. My family's grown, I can't fit them in 5 seats anymore. What do I do? Do I buy a second car? Do I continue to put more money into this? Do I buy a larger car, newer, used car, a new car, used car by, kind of using the mall analogy? And so I think I think you've characterized it well. It's that kind of decision that you're faced with today. But making no decision is clearly not a good option, at least in my opinion.
Thank you. Anything else, Cliff?
So we committed to 2 hours for this, and whether you go longer is of course up to you, but do you have, council members, do you have anything that we have not addressed today that we can try and get for you in time for tomorrow's meeting?
I think for me is that question of the decision. I think that's the one part I feel like we haven't talked about is tomorrow. I figure we all agree that we're going to decide which option to pursue. The next question is what are the benefits of voting on the bond language and amount, doing the official resolution tomorrow? Are there advantages, disadvantages to that? Are there advantages to waiting another week to the 14th? Is there advantages waiting 2 more weeks to the 21st? If we could have, that's something that's a burning question for me, so if we could get that information tomorrow, that would be helpful.
I'm ready to make a decision on both tomorrow.
Okay.
And we'll work on the suggestion about comparing the operating costs, total and per square foot for the 3 options, so we can show that as well.
I think ideally tomorrow, if you can, if you're ready to, as I see the decision tomorrow, pick between 1, 2, and 3. Once you pick that, then let's nail down the number that you want to put into the bond, and if there's any restricting language is, you know, we mentioned the advice has been to keep the language as broad as possible in the bond question. But if you want to restrict it, you can do that. But I think unless there's a lot of debate to be had, I think that in terms of making the decision, there's an advantage to getting it out there early so that you can prepare the information that goes out and have, because you're going to lose, remember, you're going to lose some days because of the mail-in ballot starting, you know, March or October 16th or so. You gain some of that by making the decision tomorrow which way you want to go. You gain some of that back.
Okay, that's certainly one of my considerations. I think we need to get on it as soon as possible because we have such a short time frame.
I appreciate that, George. So do I. One, Mayor?
Oh, I was just, in conclusion, just say, just to the council, you guys are smart, you're very wise, you're fiscally conservative. I've worked with all of you and you're great. And you take your job really serious, which I really appreciate. But I want you to think back to 1968 when they made a decision to go out for a bond. They were probably having similar discussions as we're having right now. Because it's never easy to go out for a bond. It's hard and it's a tough decision to make. But think about it. They bonded in 1968, the building opened in 1972. That was exact 50 years ago right now was when they were having the same discussion that we're having. And they were brave enough and could look forward in the future enough to see we needed something. And I'm sure they didn't think that we'd be here 50 years later. They probably thought maybe 30, 35, 40. So I feel like we've really pushed the envelope. We've got our bang for our buck. But it's our time to step up and be okay with making a decision that's gonna impact our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. We need to be responsible leaders of the city. So just think, kind of, that's, because I really don't like bonds myself. But that's how, when I did this, when I was board president for the public education bond, when we set the record at $108 million, sold it at the highest that it's ever been sold. That's how I had to, someone did it for me when I was a student here in Provo. And now as a parent, it's my turn to do it for them. And so let's really take to heart how important and significant this decision is tomorrow.
I appreciate that very much. And I'd also like to thank all the effort that's gone into getting us where we are today. This is huge. We've had so many people back here that have been helping us in Brixton. They have been patient with us, and I appreciate their efforts. And I'm sorry, but we've had
awesome partners.
Yes, and we've had a lot of awesome partners on this, and we've eliminated some already, and we've gone forward. But I appreciate the effort that keeps us focused on what the good for the city. So thank you for that. Anything else that we want to talk about tonight? Sleep well. Haha.
If you do think there's something you want us to try and address, email me overnight and we'll try and get it.
Same with us. If there's some question for us, I'll be available tomorrow until we meet all night. You can email me and I'll email you right back if you have questions.
Thank you. We will adjourn by, what's the word? Thank you.
I know you're talking about that. I've got